Welcome to Tales from the Bridge. Today, Chris Mancini joins Kevin, Sam, and myself. We have a wonderful conversation about all kinds of stuff. We hope you enjoy this one. Chris has been on another show that we produce called Finer Points Trivia Cast, so if you haven't checked that one out, go and look up Finer Points Trivia Cast. We'll have it in the show notes. All right, Chris is waiting for us. Let's make our way over to the bridge. Joining us today, writer, director, comedian, and fellow podcaster, Chris Mancini. Some of you may know him as the writer of the graphic novel Long Ago and Far Away, and his soon-to-be-published Rise of the Kung Fu Dragon Master. He's also the host of the popular podcast, What Are You Watching? And the radio play podcast, Conversations from the Abyss, and The Quiet Journey of Professor Atwood. His film credits include Asylum from Lionsgate and Earbuds, a podcasting documentary. If you happen to be a new dad, he's even got a book for you called Pacify Me, a handbook for freaked out dads. Be sure to check out his website, White Cat Entertainment. There's a ton to see here. Welcome, Chris.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
You're a busy guy by any definition. and in 2020, you decided to hang your own shingle and launch White Cat Entertainment. Can you tell us what the latest project is that you're working on?
Absolutely. Well, first, I started the new company in 2020, right before the pandemic hit. So it's a great time to start a new company. So that really made things easier. What I wanted to do is, I've been a comedian and a podcaster and a writer for a while. I wanted to just kind of put everything under one shingle and one banner for like a storytelling company that kind of focuses on comedy and genre storytelling. And that's kind of the genesis of White Cat Entertainment. And I had a white cat for a very long time, almost 21 years, which is a very long time for a cat to live. And her name was Avatar, way before the movie. So nobody understood what the name was. I'm like, well, it's an angel that comes down and takes, the form of an animal. But it doesn't mean that anymore. So that name got kind of co-opted. But so I thought that would be kind of way to kind of like, I don't know, like kind of honor her a little bit, because she was always my writing partner. She would come in and sit next to me while I would write on the computer. And I thought, well, maybe she's, still there kind of watching what I write. And so I thought that would be kind of fun to have the company named after my white cat. So
nice.
But the main things I've been working on too, the one of the things I wanted to launch right away when the new company launched was one of the podcasts, The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood. I launched two of them. The one was the interview show, but Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood was a really special one for me, where I wanted to kind of like entertain and make people smile, but also help them at the same time. So it's kind of a hybrid comedy, storytelling, relaxation, sleep aid podcast. So I kind of combined all of those things together so people could kind of listen to it, chill out. Like, I've had people like say, I don't use it to sleep. I use it to just kind of settle my day at the end of the day and do some light exercises and stretching. Some people say they put it on, it puts them right out. That doesn't bother me. If they say it puts them right to sleep, that's fine. That's, I'm leaning into that. I've heard that criticism before, so this is fine now that it's intentional. But what I wanted to do is just kind of create like a tool and a fun storytelling podcast that you don't have to worry about. If you've got anxiety or sleep disorders or insomnia, there's not like breathing exercises. You just follow the professor on his journeys. You listen to the story. There's music and sound effects, original music by Ron Tansky at every single episode. So you could kind of just drift off any way you want, like get you out of your own head or fall right to sleep. So that one I've been really happy with, and it's been a labor of love for sure.
Can you just kind of go, where did you land on coming up with a niche like that? Because that seems pretty unique.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I was looking at like what was out there and what wasn't out there. And I'm like, okay, well, there's all these different sleep podcasts where they're basically try to bore you or they tell you how to breathe and all of these things. And I'm like, well, what if, there's a sleep podcast that just kind of is a narrative story that you can get lost in the characters and the journeys and where they're going. And even if you fall asleep or don't fall asleep, like some characters and things are referenced before, and you create like this world that people can kind of fall asleep to. So I always wanted to base it in storytelling. So you could get as much out of it as you want. If you don't fall asleep, you get a full story. If you do fall asleep, then I've helped you when you couldn't sleep. So, but I wanted it narrative driven. I didn't want it to just kind of be like, me, or reading from Wikipedia. I mean, granted, there is some of that, but I wanted to frame it in a storytelling, kind of universe.
So it's almost like reminds me of the sort of ASMR thing that's sort of happening, and that I like that idea of giving up people an opportunity to sort of settle their minds, but with a story, at the end of a hectic day or something.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're at an early stage in podcasting in a way when you really think about it, and you've been here for so long, Chris.
Yes.
Do you think that there's many fresh ideas on the way? Do you think that we've saturated most of the formats, or do you think there's just so many different formats that just have not been either invented or discovered, or do you see other directions podcasting going?
It's interesting. It's like when you've got literally hundreds of thousands of podcasts, and some are, doing a lot of the same things, some are doing something different. There's always that kind of like mindset of like, well, everything's been kind of done, there's not going to be anything new, and that's usually when something new does show up. So I think there's always room for innovation and improvement in everything from like an interview show to audio plays to anything that would fit in the podcast medium. One of the things that we are seeing that's not necessarily making things better is corporations coming in and just throwing a bunch of money, but not really innovating format or anything. They're just doing what everyone else is doing with a larger budget and with a lot of celebrity talent. So I don't think the innovation is going to come from there. I think the innovation is going to come from the guy in his basement, or the group of friends getting together and creating a new story, or a bunch of comedians that figure out that, well, we're done talking about our lives, let's try to do something different. So I think that's where the innovation is going to come. I don't think it's going to come from the corporations.
But in a way, you've kind of revitalized the oldest sort of radio entertainment with the radio play, like this sort of using podcasting for storytelling, where it's often this sort of like interview format or a magazine type format. Like,
yes,
is this a sort of a rise in this? Are you the only? Is it a gap that you find that you're filling in this space?
There's a lot. When podcasts first starting, there wasn't a ton of narrative podcasts, and then Welcome to Night Vale kind of came along and blew all of that up, and then Thrilling Adventure Hour, which is essentially a throwback to the old style radio plays, and that started off actually as a live show when they did that. But I feel like there's a lot more than there was now that there was before. So I think now narrative podcasting is actually part of the landscape now. I don't think it's not like, oh, that's a narrative one now. Like at a decade ago, yeah, that was unusual. Now I don't think it is. I think there's a lot to choose from now.
So we are a science fiction based podcast. Do you think that there's an importance to science fiction in literature in general, or even just the public? Do you think science fiction helps the public grasp new ideas? And do you think there's any importance to science fiction, or is it just entertainment?
I think for me, that for science fiction, I think you actually hit on a lot of different good points. I think it's all of those things that you just said. And the one thing that I think is ignored a lot, science fiction is often a warning that goes unheeded. But I think when you look at classic science fiction, everything from the books that we all grew up with, like everything from like Dune to Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle and all of these, even like Alan Dean Foster stuff, like when you like super, when you go old school. But you can go all the way back to like the Martian Chronicles and Ray Bradbury and the lessons in Fahrenheit 451. He was trying to tell us literally decades ago, and that I feel like we're going in the wrong direction. I mean, less people are reading. There's screens everywhere, and I'm thinking, I don't know how Ray Bradbury knew, but he kind of knew that this was kind of coming, this future. And and one of the things that science fiction can sometimes get wrong is that the best science fiction is, of course, about people. But if you concentrate just on the spaceships and the aliens and the monsters and all that stuff, then it's empty. Like the science fiction to me is big ideas. It's what if and what then, and all of these great questions get asked, and then science fiction writers answer them. That's what's so great, is you don't have to wonder, oh, what would happen in dystopian country or a dystopian world. Well, you read Fahrenheit 451, read 1984. This is what would happen. So you don't have to wonder. This here it is. And you could read Brave New World, any of the classics. So and you've got Handmaid's Tale. I mean, it goes on and on and on to all these lessons that we've been ignoring. So, and I think science fiction also makes it more palatable. So you could actually, well, here's your medicine, but we're going to frame it in a way that is more appealing and entertaining. So the best science fiction does everything that you just said.
And that's something that we often argue about amongst ourselves on this podcast is it about the ideas or is it about the people and the characters? And
right.
Obviously, it's about both. Some of us are more willing to forgive if the character side isn't all there, and others are more willing to forgive if the ideas aren't there. But certainly, it's the complete package, isn't it? You tell the story, you have that predictive warning or that great idea that you can share with your audience, but you frame it in a way that's accessible. And
the one thing that can always be forgiven with science fiction is that if the idea and the acting and the characters are great, the effects. Like if you see dated effects or whatever, but if the idea and the execution is there, there's, literally hundreds of Twilight Zone episodes that go very, very deep into some science fiction territory. And it's like cardboard and light bulbs. So, it's laughable, but you see it's a product of the time. And because the idea is sound, you forgive that, I think, the most quickly.
Yeah, right on. So what have you been watching? What type of stuff have you been reading, or what sci-fi content have you been ingesting?
It's been a lot. I mean, I've been trying to finish the Rise of the Kung Fu Dragon Master. That's the one thing that's been taking a lot of my time. That's the new graphic novel, and that's kind of like putting that together. It's been taking probably about a year and a half, and I was always a big fan of Big Trouble in Little China, so that kind of was an influence for that. But put it like a comedy action martial arts fantasy about a guy who gets the power of the dragon that has no idea what to do with it, doesn't really deserve it, and makes things worse. So that's what I've been working on. We actually today we just got the final files delivered, so we're putting it together right now. So I'm hoping to have that out in the next couple of months for sure. But what I've been doing is I've been watching a lot of different things. Like one of the things I've been watching is a lot of superhero stuff, which is, of course, science fiction, like everything from Ms. Marvel to Thor. But one of the biggest one that I've really been watching is the new Star Trek shows in the Star Trek universe. And, they're a mixed bag because there's so many of them and they're not really sure sometimes where the focus should be. But the one Strange New Worlds I've been thoroughly enjoying. And as far as science fiction goes, and we're talking a little bit about, throwback science fiction. And, when these new Star Trek shows first came out, they were like, well, it's not your father's Star Trek. And I'm thinking, well, but I'm a father now, and maybe I do want that Star Trek. And I feel like I got it with Strange New Worlds, what goes back to original series and these original characters, the structure of the show of being like the episodic, where it's not a linear serial. And I thought I've just been really enjoying it for a number of different reasons. One of them is because it's throwback science fiction. It's nostalgic for me to watch as someone who grew up on the original series and all of the Star Trek shows, but also they've modernized it and put new, fresh ideas and new science fiction elements and even or twisting old tropes. In fact, to the point where they even take some of the old original series tropes and then put them into a new lens and a new filter, like the series finale. Well, what would happen if this captain was in charge instead of this captain, and now we're going to see what happens. So I've been thoroughly enjoying that new series, Strange New Worlds.
Ever wondered what it takes to make it in the movie business? Peel back the curtain with 4-6 Success Filmmaking. 4-6 Success Filmmaking is where filmmakers share their stories and the secrets.
It's beyond competitive out there.
There have been movies that it's taken me 10 years to get made.
Don't wait to create. Like, you've got to just keep making stuff.
Tune in to 4-6 Success Filmmaking for your dose of cinematic realness, direct from the voices that have lived it.
Yeah, we have as well. I think we've talked about that a couple times, that we're loving that they're revisiting the original structure of an episodic television show. It's refreshing to see. I hope it becomes a little more common. It's tricky for me to keep going on all these shows. These shows, they go on, they end with a cliffhanger, and I'm a little bit. I think we talked about this before. Fatigued.
Yeah, I hear you.
Having to, hanging on to the end. I did that with Lost, and that's all I'm doing. Yeah, like I went for that ride, and that was over 10 years ago, and I'm done. I'm not doing it again.
Twice shy. Yeah.
Well, Strange New Worlds is yes, they bring it back. It feels like coming home for me as well. But the characters are awesome. You know, they're
Right.
so likable, and they interact in a way that's very accessible. And the storylines, like you said, are new and right on with that twist near the end about what could happen if different timelines, and I think that's going to be really exciting to see how they resolve with another season.
Yeah, I thought the only thing that bothered me a little bit was the Kirk casting. Was like, he looks and acts nothing like James T. Kirk. I'm not sure what happened here, but I didn't get any impression that this was James T. Kirk, other than that you called him Captain Kirk. That was the only. But I thought everything else with characters and casting has been right on. That was a weird little misstep that the show normally doesn't make. So there's always some kind of story behind the scenes that'll come out 10 years later, and we'll find out what happened.
Yeah, I thought I was missing something. When James T. Kirk came on, and I'm like, well, I'm sure it'll resolve itself. And then I realized, doesn't seem to. He just seems miscast. Yeah, I agree.
I gotta ask, as a writer, what was your gateway drug into that world? Was it comedy, right, or writing for graphic novels? Like, what was your kind of genesis point there?
You know, it was kind of a mix of things, because I grew up with so many different things, everything from like the 80s movies to devouring like sci-fi and fantasy novels to and then starting to do stand-up in my probably, it was about 18 or 19 when I started. And kind of putting all those things together. And I was wondering, like, well, can I mix sci-fi and comedy? And can I mix fantasy and comedy? And can I do things without mixing them too? Could I go straight horror or science fiction? And I've always kind of played around with all of them. And I've had mixed results for sure. Some people think some things people like. Some people, that never got off the hard drive for the for development. But it's been a fun kind of like experiment to see, which pieces I could put together. Like with Long Ago and Far Away, it was a fantasy comedy, and with Rise of the Kung Fu Dragon Master, it's an action fantasy, martial arts comedy. But when I made Asylum, well, that's a whole story in and of itself. That was supposed to be a straight horror movie, and then they ruined it, and then I had to come back and fix it for the studio and then make it a comedy. It was insane. It was, and then they never rebranded it. So it was supposed to be called Death of a Horror Movie, which, because I shot all this extra footage of the editors and the horror company, like looking at this footage that they shot in Bulgaria and saying, this is a mess, like a Mystery Science Theater, as they were looking at the footage. So that movie actually came out. It's still out. I thought Lionsgate was going to bury it. For some reason, it still shows up everywhere. And but they never rebranded it. So it's still called Asylum, and it still has like, this weird like horror branding on it. So people who know me and my fans know what happened. They think they love the movie because it's hilarious. They know the story behind it. But a horror fan coming cold is furious because they don't know what they're watching.
It features one of the lone gunmen. Is that correct?
But yeah, my buddy Dean Haglund, I called him. I was like, look, I got to get some actors down to Baton Rouge. And I was like, because I originally called him to recommend somebody for me. And he's like, well, I'm free. I'll do it. I'm like, great. Yeah, come on down. So there is actually a movie that exists with me, Dean Hagland, a bunch of comedians I brought in from L.A., and Stephen Rea from The Crying Game, and a bunch of bald Bulgarian actors doing a terrible accents that are supposed to be SWAT team members in an asylum. So it's like nothing you've ever seen, and it's like nothing you should ever have seen, but it exists and it's there. And it I thought as far as like putting it together, it could have been a fun horror comedy if they would have rebranded it properly so people knew what they were getting, but it was quite an experience.
Okay, is that common then with a company like Lionsgate, which is a leader in production of film? Like, this is common?
No, it is not common for it to happen at any level of production. But it was the movie studio. Lionsgate was just a distributor. The movie studio that made it was a different company, and that's when kind of like the production like went rogue, and they threw my original script away. But they kept all the character names, so it was really bizarre. But I think it's like you could probably find it like on Amazon Prime or Shudder. It's still somewhere. But if you want now, if you know what you're getting into, you could have fun watching it for sure.
But you had people that you could call, right? Like, so that's sort of cool.
Yes.
And so, so my follow up to this then has to be, it's the apocalypse, and you get to pick your group to face the hordes of undead. Hitch is you can only select from a pool of your favorite comedy and graphic novel writers who joins your team.
Wow. Okay. Do I have to know them personally, or I can just pick? So
no, just pick. You just pick. Yeah. Richard Pryor. Go for it.
Well, one of them would be Frank Miller, because after making Ronin, I think he has a very good idea of what the apocalypse would look like. So I think he's already kind of preparing for it. So Alan Moore, who already acts like he's in the apocalypse. So I think again a lot of great preparation on his part. And he also did V for Vendetta, so he's very aware of what's going on. And then let's see, for the third one, I would probably, I think maybe Evan Dorkin. Or is that the guy that does Welcome to Elkinville? I think it's Evan Dorkin. I can't remember. I'm blanking on his name, but he's really funny. So I think you have to balance it out with one really funny person so you don't go insane in the apocalypse. Is that right, Evan Dorkin?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
that's a good picture team. Them.
Yeah,
that's a good team. No Doug Benson.
No, well, you said graphic novel writer, yeah, but
yeah,
comedian wise, yeah, probably. I don't know how useful Doug would be though in an apocalypse. So I'm trying to think, are there any survivalist comics? No, they're going to be the first ones to go. They're going to be, comedians are going to be the ones that are like, well, let's see, who do we really need? Let's see, doctors, farmers, comedians. All right, third tier. You guys are third tier. So now learn how to fish. So
yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I'm not making it into the bunker either. I'm pretty certain of that. I'm self-aware enough.
We'll be the ones that go on the one space liner, in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, when they send half of society on one liner. They just want to get rid of the hairdressers and that's us. We're being sent on that.
We'll have excellent hair, and all our filing will be impeccable.
Right on.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us a little bit more about? I know you've told us a little bit about Rise of the Kung Fu Dragon Master.
Yeah.
Is it? Did you say it was fantasy? It's not historical fiction comedy. It's straight up. You're going to have some magic and fantasy and tell us a bit about that.
It's like a Big Trouble in Little China, where there's like demons and monsters and dragons, and it's and a lot of jokes about incompetence and entitlement. So nice. It's really fun. And it's like I said, I don't know if I said in the last one, but I am still stuck in the 80s, so it definitely has a feel of like that kind of buddy Big Trouble in Little China feel to it, and which is something that we don't see anymore. Like we don't see the big action comedies anymore, and I wanted to kind of bring that back a little bit, at least in graphic novel form. And we went back and forth a lot for the designs of the dragons, because I wanted that to be really cool. And like, all right, what would this look like? So I think I'm very happy with the way it's coming out. So I'm very anxious in the next couple weeks to get it done.
That must be really fun to finish up there when you see the finish line and see it coming. That must be very rewarding.
It is, and it's also because these things take like so long. Like this is probably a year and a half to 2 years to get it completely done, because I had to go through 2 Kickstarters for that one. The first Kickstarter, I only funded the first half. The second half was the second Kickstarter, where Long Ago and Far Away was able to do the entire thing like from the back, but it still took just as long to make because it's still another 200-page graphic novel. And with Long Ago and Far Away, it also went back to like the things that I grew up with, like all of the Narnia books, and what would happen if those kids they go to the fantasy world, they defeat the witch, and they come back to our world. But then what happens if one of them's 30, he runs a comic book store, he ends up being a huge jerk, and then he has to go back in that world again as an adult? And then that's what Long Ago and Far Away is. Would he just make things worse because he's kind of a jackass now? And I always wanted to kind of play with those science fiction and fantasy tropes in the with comedy together. But the one thing I'm very careful of is, because I'm such a big fan of comedy, science fiction, and action, I never want to make fun of the genre themselves. Like even with Long Ago and Far Away, there's a respect to the actual fantasy and the classic fantasy there, and the jokes come from the actual things that are happening and the characters. But I'm never like making fun of the genre or the world in anything I kind of do, because I feel like you have to start with a respect of what you're doing, and then you can make the jokes bounce off from there.
So would you consider yourself a big Kurt Russell fan then? If
yes,
with Big Trouble in Little China, because the Thing is one of my all-time favorite science fiction films. That's
and Escape from New York, Escape from LA. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and then also Big Trouble in Little China, for some reason, really reminds me a lot of The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai. It's like just that goofy. I mean, it can make fun of itself because it's not taking itself seriously. So you're not disrespecting by using that. So would you say nostalgia affects the stuff you create now when it comes to the fantasy and the sci-fi, that the stuff that you loved in the 80s as a kid is now you trying to share that with younger generation or even just your friends?
You know what? I think it's a subconscious thing. I wasn't even aware of it at the beginning, but now as I'm getting older and I create more content, I'm like, oh yeah, I think that is definitely in there, whether I wanted it or not, it's there. Because we're always shaped by the experience we have and the content we consume as content creators. And if that's the stuff we grew up with, that's the stuff that's going to be referenced often when we make new product and we come up with new ideas. So it's definitely there for sure. Like if I hadn't grown up watching Spielberg movies and Monty Python movies and reading all of these books, I think, my work would probably look a little differently. Yeah.
Yeah. Like if you look back at like when you were first getting into this, would your older self recommend or have advice for your younger self now?
Yeah, I probably would. I mean, I started writing probably at like 16, and I was. I mean, this sounds like I'm making it up, but back then, you could actually write short stories and submit them to magazines, and if you were lucky, you would get them published. And now maybe there's one, I don't know. There are no more like fantasy science fiction magazines like Weird Tales and all of those things, but they were critical in like the Pulp Fiction days and all of those things. That's where publishers would get their or writers would get their start. And I started writing. I got paid as a writer probably at 18, but as a journalist, like I was a local journalist for a local newspaper, and that's kind of where I got my chops as far as structure and writing and how to get ideas across succinctly. And I would always write from then on, pretty much. And and it's the life of any artist. Like you have successes, you have downsides, you have failures, and it goes up and down. But I think one of the keys of any artist, writer, actor, sculptor, it doesn't matter, painter, you just keep doing it. And the more you do it, the more it informs your work and what you're doing. And I think the advice I would probably give to my younger self is maybe to focus a little bit more, because I've been trying to do so many different things, from everything from comedy to filmmaking to writing. It's I would say, because you split your focus and your time a little bit more than looking back on it than I probably should have. I would have said, all right, no, focus a little bit more on what you really want to do. And that was always been writing.
But is that not a bit of a value proposition for you? Because you've got graphic novels, you've got film and podcast, and so you can tell different stories with those mediums. And I feel like you've got to be a bit of an expert on what types of stories to tell on these various mediums.
It's definitely a learning curve. Like the stuff I've done and I'm familiar with, yes, absolutely. I consider myself fairly knowledgeable in them. But like something like like graphic novels where I just got into recently, there was a bit of a learning curve, but now I'm more comfortable, with it. And it's also a different type of writing, but some of the stuff is related. Like when you're writing a screenplay, or if you're making storyboards for a film, there's also panel breakdowns on a comic book. And there's all these kind of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences too. And when you kind of figure those out and you have patient people helping you and working with you, like editors and artists and stuff, then it actually makes it easier as well. So I mean, if I had another 100 years, I'd be an expert in all of these things for sure. So.
Right. Well, and I guess also funding them, because before you could try to submit it to a magazine and they'd pay you for that content, but now you're like you in particular, you're doing things like crowdfunding and Kickstarter, and sounds like you've had some success with that. Can you talk a bit about that?
Absolutely. I've done like all different versions of funding, whereas I've gotten, I got a book deal with Simon and Schuster. I've gotten crowdfunding success with graphic novels and with the movie, like the original Earbuds, the podcasting documentary was crowdfunded by podcast fans, but then it got picked up by a distributor with Comedy Dynamics. Then it went everywhere. But whereas, the horror movie, it was a purchase. So it's all, it's all kind of different things. But what I like now is the tools. Like you're also seeing people that you think like, well, do they even really need to crowdfund? Like, you see like some celebrities or big actors or writers or directors, and in all mediums, film, novels, comics, and, because you're seeing publishers do it too, because now crowdfunding has gotten to the point where it's also a marketing tool. Like you can generate a fair amount of money at the beginning, or you can also use that to market like your product when it actually gets finished. So there's different ways to use it. The other thing that I love about crowdfunding is it's like, all right, you've got a project that you really believe in that no one else believes in or no one wants. Well, then, okay, let me bring it directly to the fans and see if they want it. And you get a response within 30 days. So if it's viable or not. But I think what I love about it is just there's more tools available now to create content, everything from TikTok to, Kickstarter.
You have been going to San Diego for the comic convention for many, many years.
I have.
We would love to come down sometime, or at least I would. I'm guessing you guys would. Maybe sometime in the next 10 years, we'll try and make it, guys?
Let's do it. Yeah.
So we do. In Toronto, there's the Fan Expo Canada, which is Canada's biggest comic convention. So we're running 3 panels there this year.
Oh, great!
So we're super excited to do that. Can you tell us about your experience? Any funny stories at San Diego? And just tell us a little bit about what it's like to be a part of Comic-Con and San Diego.
It's well, first of all, it's the biggest one pretty much on the planet. So there's a massive amount of people that pretty much descend on San Diego, and it's the most people you'll ever see in one space, with the exception of maybe like in a Resident Evil movie when everyone's trying to leave the city before the zombies get them. That's kind of what Comic-Con looks like. So you are literally shoulder to shoulder for an entire weekend. And I was going there before it got super, super packed, where it was just crowded, where you could get into the halls and you could get and see the panels and all of these things. But I mean, I would always go as like a, they have like professional badges for people that are in the industry or doing different things. And that doesn't get you into any free priority seating at all, but just gives you like a badge to go. But we could kind of go to the panels and stuff we wanted to see. And then I was always on panels too. So I would like go to panels, be on panels, and also walk around the floor, which always a lot of fun. But, the last decade or so, it's just getting so unmanageable with the crowds where it's really, really tough. to kind of like there's a panel you want to see, you have to wait in line maybe like hours just because you're in a line. And then what happens is you go into the panels and the people may want to see the next panel. They don't empty the rooms. They don't leave. So the amount of people that leave between panels, that's the amount of spaces that are left. So you have people that go to the famous Hall H and they get there a day before and they literally just stay there the entire day. So unless you're in that beginning part of the line, you're not going to get into that hall. But what I always love about it is you're just like kind of like around your people, and you've got like everyone's here's a sci-fi or comic book or movie, like all the things that you love. There's a million people with you in the same space that love it as well. It's just you wish maybe you had a little more room. But I've also been to like the smaller ones, like, LA Comic-Con, where I've actually done signings, and those are actually a little more manageable because you can kind of sit, you could walk around the floor, and it's not quite as big. And some of them have more of a focus on the actual comics, like WonderCon in Anaheim is a little bit more about the comics and, with the panels and the floor, whereas Comic-Con's really about the spectacle. It's about, the movies and Marvel and Star Wars and, the giant things that are coming out from the studios. So and that's one of the complaints that, diehard comic book fans have, is that it's gotten too much away from comics, but it's not changing anytime soon. That's pretty much what San Diego Comic-Con is going to be. But yeah, I've done some really fun panels. Like I've done like the Kung Fu superhero extravaganza, where we see that the new martial arts movies are coming out, and then we would comment on them, and they would interview martial artists. And then I did a bunch of comic book and comedy panels. There was one really fun one called Comics on Comics, where it would just be comedians talking about comic books, and but it would also be mixed with some great creators. Like that's when I first met Jimmy Palmiotti and his wife Amanda Connor. And that was really fun to meet, some of these comic book creators that about that, you don't normally see. And then you get to be on panels with them. So, which is really fun. But yeah, it's always a good time. It's just, everyone's got the same complaint. It's just too crowded.
We blame Marvel for that.
Yeah.
Marvel
Studios. Yeah.
It really just seemed to start. I mean, if you look back at Iron Man 2008, that's where I remember seeing even Fan Expo for us in Toronto, because I would have gone in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. And we were going to get a picture drawn by one of the artists of a comic book that we loved, getting our own Batman in the style that we wanted, and talking to them for a moment. And getting in line to see someone that acted in an original Star Wars trilogy was just a 5-minute wait,
right?
And you got to shake their hand and talk to them, and it's just not like that. And
no, Comic-Con, there's literally queues to see any of the talent and the actors that you have to. That's another thing you got to like sign up for in advance and wait in line.
Yeah.
Your documentary Earbuds, exploring podcasting, it was unique, right? I mean, this is looking at an industry broadly around the world. You traveled and spoke to podcasters, but it was 2016, and here we are, 2022. Do you see that documentary being different if you were to do it today, or how do you see this industry's changed?
Absolutely. It's a moment in time, and the core of podcasting hasn't changed. And that's that it was a new medium that has a unique emotional connection between the podcaster and the fan that exists in no other medium. That hasn't changed. That's the same. And that's really what we explored in the documentary. Everything from like, meeting fans in Australia of like a movie podcast we did in LA, or going to Japan, talking to the fans there, and just how we're connecting with people all over the world was amazing. One of the things that has changed now, and we touched on it earlier, is the corporations and money are now in podcasting. They're seeing it as a viable medium. So you're seeing a lot more networks, a lot more divisions, and a lot more money being put into the podcasting space, which is good and bad. It's good that it's getting recognized as a viable medium. It's bad because then a lot of smaller guys are getting kind of squeezed out, because when you've got like all these celebrities with podcasts, then there's less choices that people are actually going to dig and find something that's a little bit different, because everything on the Apple homepage is like, the new podcast from these 8 celebrities. So it makes it a little more challenging for sure for, the smaller guys. But that I'd say would probably be the biggest change. There's more corporations and more money in them now. But I think the core of podcasting, that connection between the host and the listener, hasn't changed. I think that's still there, and that's what we're all kind of tapping into. And I think that will continue, because that's really the heart of podcasting.
Yeah, and that celebrity thing, it's almost like a hack, isn't it? It's a hack to solve the discoverability problem on a platform where people have awesome content, but how do you find it and know about it? You just throw a celebrity into it, and suddenly it just builds all this credibility. So a lot of people are 100%. Willing to
and they want that like instant, like, oh, we need all these listeners right away, and we're gonna pre-sell the advertising, and all this stuff just kind of happens like it's a different medium, and it really isn't. But yeah, that's one of the issues for sure.
It kind of reminds me of the film festival scene, where 30 years ago it was independent filmmakers, and they were able to show what they were able to do, and now the film festivals are just the biggest Hollywood movies anyway. It's
it's
really
a different vibe.
Thing.
I mean, Sundance has always kind of been like that, but the other festivals haven't, and where there was a lot of discoverability. But now it's, the other thing is, no one's really going to them anymore, and everything's online, so that it's, and I've had so much fun at film festivals over the years with having independent films in them, having friends with films in them, and just the whole vibe and scene, especially going to like Park City with Sundance, and like I played Slam Dance one of the years, and it's like nothing. There's no vibe really like a film festival vibe when you're filled with a bunch of you're surrounded by indie artists, and you're filled with this kind of like spirit of like, we could do anything, and we're making cool stuff on our own, and that vibe of film festival is hard to come by. It still exists, but it's a little harder.
Chris, I would love to get a recommendation from you. You mentioned that you grew up on a lot of classic sci-fi and stuff like that. If you could, we are a science fiction book podcast. Could you recommend maybe one of your favorites, or a science fiction book that maybe one of us haven't read, or one of our listeners? Is there a book that means something to you that you would like to recommend to our listeners?
I've mentioned Ray Bradbury many times, but his short stories are fantastic. If you haven't read Fahrenheit 451, I would say that's essential reading for any human being on the planet. So, but I'll give you the one that's your primary assignment is Fahrenheit 451. If you haven't read that, the secondary one, I always found it was a smaller story, but it was one that I really kind of enjoyed, and it was called The Integral Trees. And it was
Niven.
And it was a Larry Niven story. It was because he writes a lot of hard science fiction, so there's a lot of science-based ideas in what he creates, but it wasn't a giant epic story. It was, about a planet and a spaceship that was slowly degrading in orbit around it, and it was a lot of kind of interesting ideas in it, but it was a smaller story. So it was the kind of book that kind of like was a kind of like a break to all the bigger, headier, giant, science fiction stories. Like, if you're going to read all 10 Dune books or something, but I would say, Fahrenheit 451 and The Integral Trees are two ones that I really remember reading growing up. In fact, I just read Fahrenheit 451 again because my daughter had it assigned for high school, and she came home and I got furious. She goes, I don't want to have to read this. All my friends say it's dumb and stupid and it's boring. I said, okay, first of all your friends are wrong, and they don't know what you're talking about, and they're probably not reading anything at all. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to read it together. I'm going to read it. I'm going to help you with the assignments. So we would read the chapters, like she would read her book. I got it on my Kindle, and like, all right, what page are you on? And then we would discuss it and do the assignments together. And I would help her to explain anything that she didn't understand, because some of the references are a little dated. But she ended up loving the book and understanding it a little bit more. And I would recommend that to any parent whose kid doesn't want to read or drift, if you read something with them and then kind of like experience with them, they actually get a little more interested in what they're reading and they appreciate it more.
And I agree with that completely. I have 2 kids as well, and I still read to them. One of my daughters is going into high school, and we do it, but the way we make it work is I choose a book, and then she chooses a book, and then my son chooses a book, and then it becomes a kind of an egalitarian process. And yeah, we can process it all together at the same time. It requires time, and it requires kids to be a little forgiving, and we'll see how long that lasts. But it's the best, right? Because we can kind of process it all together and talk
absolutely. And the other thing I do for them too is I have 2 kids, and 17 and 14. I say, look, whenever you want a book or a comic book, we'll always pay for those for you. Like, anything else, video games, that's birthday, you have to pay for, trip to Starbucks, whatever, but books and comics are always free. You can, and one of those deals, I wish they would use it more, but my daughter did just buy a couple books. But I always feel like that's the way to kind of encourage the reading a little bit, is like, well, this is something if you want, and you could pick whatever you want, but that will always pay for those, until you're in your 20s. So
I like that. I'm going to steal that if it's all right.
Yeah,
like
of course.
Wow.
Yeah, anything that encourages reading in youth is that's good.
No, that's
my daughter
fantastic.
wanted to see it. I was like, well, I tell you what, if you can read the book, get through the book, then you can watch the movie. And if you ever seen the book, it's like
1,000 pages long, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like 3,000 pages.
Yeah.
It looks like it's enormous. So
just kind of get back
excellent.
from college. I finished. So
yeah, that's exactly.
And just to throw back to Integral Trees, there's a sequel called The Smoke Ring, I believe. I don't know if you read that one, Chris.
No, I don't think I ever got that far, but yeah.
So I have them on my shelf, and I have not picked them up yet because I have a half a dozen or so Niven books, and I'm going for that one next. So I just want to say thank you. I'm going for that one soon.
Absolutely. See, you already had it on your shelf.
And the Integral Trees, I think it was a Nebula and a Hugo Award nominee in that year whenever it was published. So
that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
So where can our listeners find your graphic novels?
Well, if you want a signed hard copy, you can go to whitecatentertainment.com. There is a store there, and you can kind of get everything from the graphic novels to Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood blanket. So if you want to curl up and be very comfortable while you fall off to sleep listening to the podcast. But it's also available on, like, Long Ago and Far Away is now on Kindle/Comixology. You could go and get that right now. And then also Rise of the Kung Fu Dragon Master will also be there. It's also on Drive-Thru Comics and Apple Books. But from what I've seen, the way graphic novels are kind of treated, the best, highest resolution is really Kindle and Drive-Thru Comics. Like some of the other places, they can't quite get the technology as crisp as some of these other places. But that would be my recommendation. Or just buy it from the White Cat store. We have the high-res PDFs too.
Excellent. And then if anyone wants to follow you on the socials, they would find you on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. It's Chris J. Mancini. And then if you want to follow the company, that's White Cat Stories. That's kind of a new feed. So I think there's only like about 160 followers on that. But me, I'm at Chris J. Mancini. And you could get everything from the website. If you go to whitecatentertainment.com, there's links to everything.
Chris, thank you so much. It's great to see you again. It's great to hear more details about what you're working on and the stuff that's to come. I can't wait to grab a copy of Rise of the Kung Fu Dragon Master. Rise of the Kung Fu Dragon Master.
Yes. I tried to make I tried to make an awkward title so people would know it's kind of a comedy.
yeah, but it's got so many good. It's got the keywords in there, right?
Yes,
it's fantastic. So,
and I'll give you a little teaser for, like, I pictured that as a trilogy too, and as an 80s trilogy. Of course, you could probably guess what the titles of the next two would be. It's of course Fall of the Kung Fu Dragon Master and
Fall, yeah,
and
Rise.
Return. Yes,
Return.
But well, thanks for having me, guys. This was a lot of fun. Always good to do a deep dive into sci-fi, especially stuff I read as a kid.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Please rate, review, let us know what you think of the show. And also, tell a friend. Let someone else know that loves science fiction about the show. We'd really appreciate it. Next week, we are talking about Pierce Brown's Red Rising. We've got a lot more to talk about on that episode as well. Thank you so much. Until next time.